Welcome to Fredericksburg Mission, a podcast talking all things mental health and wellness in the Burgh, brought to you by...
How do you shorten the time it takes to buy a car? Car buying just got easier. Pohanka365.com lets you complete as much or as little of the car buying process online. Pohanka365.com. Car buying simplified. Anytime, anywhere.
Welcome to Fredericksburg Mission. My name is Angela Rivers, and today I am here with Nicole Robyn, the owner of Freedom Society. Welcome, Nicole.
Oh, so good to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And
absolutely.
A two-part series. I had Gavin on before, so it's nice to have you follow suit with the same topic.
Wonderful. Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so I'd love for you to tell the listeners what Freedom Society is and why you began the organization.
So Freedom Society is a gift shop and tea room on Caroline Street, downtown Fredericksburg. We love being part of the downtown community and having regular customers. It's wonderful. We started in November of 2019 after a 10-year stint of owning a business that employs survivors in India making bridal accessories. So I still have that company. We do primarily bridal veils, which Ava Loren has in Fredericksburg, and many shops across the UK and US. And so I had been doing that for some time, working with survivors primarily in India, and we started a trade association for businesses that were employing survivors. And so that happened about 7 years ago, and I've served on the board of the Freedom Business Alliance since then. So FBA now has about 125 member businesses in 28 countries. And so I was seeing all these great products out there, and basically they needed more opportunity for sales in order to be able to set more free. So of the 40 plus million enslaved today, we estimate less than 1% have a way out. And of that 1%, about 80% get re-trafficked because of lack of employment opportunities. So that was kind of what led me to start a business employing survivors.
Yes, survivors of human trafficking.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I started looking at, okay, how do we bring more freedom products into the bridal industry? And it was kind of this option of like, okay, either I'll get a warehouse space to ship from, or we'll do a retail spot. And I've lived downtown for a really long time. And so my family, as you can tell from the first part of the series, are all very engaged in combating human trafficking and passionate about freedom. And so my daughter was just graduating and has done home baking businesses, and we were lamenting the fact that there wasn't a tea room in Fredericksburg, and so decided to combine the two and do a retail space with products all made by survivors and a tea room. And so that is Freedom Society.
That's amazing. And you're right, we don't have a tea room. We used to years ago, and I was quite disappointed when it went away. My daughter and I love tea parties.
No.
So, having a place to go is so nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's Freedom Society, and so we wanted to create a place where exactly that, where you can have memories, connect with those that you love across the table over a cup of tea, and everything that we love about British tea culture and our family heritage and that, and then be able to connect that to bringing freedom at the same time. So,
and then is the tea a certain type of tea? Are there various teas? You mentioned to me that you used to live overseas, and so are they similar, or is it different? Or
so we have this really wonderful company that we source teas from. That's a family-owned business here in the U.S., but they source from all over the world. But they only carry organic and fair trade teas, and so. So we trade out and have different teas that come in, and like to give that experience. We sell loose leaf as well. But yeah, it's more that that connection, that slow down. We've tried to kind of not be the spot you come and work, but more the spot you come and enjoy and make memories and slow down from life and actually take that time to sit across the table and enjoy a cup of tea and enjoy the people you love.
And I think we all need to do that more often now, just to slow down.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of our biggest compliment. Besides having Brits come in and say that they love the scones, our biggest compliment is just people saying, "Oh, it's so restful here." Yeah. And so that is really, our heart is to have it be a place where you can take that deep breath and have the long conversation.
Yeah. And then your son is recently married. So did she have one of those veils that you mentioned?
She did.
Aww.
She was wearing one of our veils, and yeah, it's so fun. So amazing, really. I started that business when my kids were little. And so it's really amazing to watch how something that becomes a passion of yours and how that influences your kids. I didn't by any means force them to go into freedom businesses, but it's such a blessing that they have done, and that they're carrying that torch as well.
And how come it's so important to you?
Well, actually, it didn't start out as something I really knew anything about. When we moved to England, I was part of a prayer group with a small group of women, and one of those young women had just come back from Thailand working with a freedom business there. And this was 15 years ago. So we really weren't talking about human trafficking, other than a very few frontline organizations. There wasn't widespread awareness. And so I really didn't know anything about human trafficking, but she had just come back from that experience and really had her heart broken. And so we spent 3 years together, both praying over this issue as well as learning about it, and finished that season with a trip to India, where we went to 5 Indian cities and met with anti-trafficking organizations. India has the largest trafficked population in the world. And just asked the same question: what is your greatest need? And all of them said employment. Now, there's lots of needs. Like I said, if globally we're seeing less than 1% have a way out, there's lots of work to still be done. But this was the basic issue they were having is that re-trafficking issue, that if there wasn't sustainable employment on the other side of trafficking, or even preventively with trafficking, that the freedom wouldn't be sustainable. So you'll see statistics about, rescues, which are wonderful, but if there isn't a long-term sustainable plan for freedom, then actually on the other side of being trafficked, you're more vulnerable to trafficking and abuse than even before you were trafficked. And so those same issues, poverty, lack of education, the same things that made you vulnerable to trafficking at the beginning, now you add trauma and, and all of that onto that. And it's very difficult to find a job or keep one sustainably. So even here in the U.S., we found, there's very few, and Virginia is not one of them, but very few states that have expungement laws for trafficking survivors. Typically, in the U.S., they, not always, but typically they get picked up with some sort of record if they're an adult, often related to prostitution or something related to their job. And the reality is, they were trafficked, but there's not a law to get that expunged, even if the trafficking case is proven. So it often is really difficult for survivors to even get that first step of employment here in the U.S., so that they're safe and sustainably free. And so that was where freedom businesses came in.
And why does it go on their record, though? I mean, if they're a victim.
Well, it's a little bit complicated, but the bottom line is, other than the state of Texas, who just a little over a month ago passed a law to make it illegal to buy sex, it's actually those that sell sex who are the ones who are doing illegal activity. So as crazy as that sounds, you could buy sex from someone and there's no punishment necessarily for that reality. And so we don't go after demand, we go after the ones who are selling. And if you're selling but you're forced to sell, then that's how you end up with a record. But also trafficking exists even in labor trafficking around very usually violent, abusive situations. And so it's not uncommon for records to be involved. So it just makes it, beside the trauma, it's difficult with a record in our, in our country to necessarily have somebody take that risk and employ you. So that's why a lot of the freedom businesses in the U.S. have popped up to be kind of that, both a community for that survivor that's trauma informed and understands, but also kind of that first step of employment, because, there is no ceiling. And I always say to people, we can often talk about survivors of human trafficking as though they're to be pitied. And there is obviously it's a heartbreaking reality, but they've already overcome incredible challenges and survived it. And so they're amazing people who have amazing possibilities and a future in front of them. And so I love when people come into the shop and see the beautiful things that survivors make. But that's just, a portion. We have, like with Gavin here last week, survivors doing editing and photo things, but we also have some of the most amazing advocates for anti-trafficking work in the U.S. are survivor leaders who have not only overcome, but now are helping to set others free and advising anti-trafficking organizations from that survivor perspective. So
their experience probably helps other survivors, to let them know that they're not alone.
Yeah. And just a lot of things that can unintentionally be done, when you're trying to set people free. When I first went into India, there were all these programs that sounded really good. And when I started the business, I would have people frequently say, well, are you making a way for survivors to own their own business? And I'd say to them, like, of course, if that's something they want to do, absolutely. But you do recognize we're trying to create sustainable employment, and most businesses that are new businesses fail, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so you're talking about adding a tremendous amount of stress on someone who's just survived a lot of trauma. And so I said, we don't want to create a ceiling for anyone. But at the same time, you need to listen to what they actually want. And when I sat with survivors, it was like, we just want to raise our children in safety. We want to, they don't need extra responsibility necessarily, unless that's, what they want to do. But just, so that dynamic of making sure that we are always doing anti-trafficking work with one, recognizing survivors are the heroes, not those of us that are fighting human trafficking, and two, that they everything we do has to be informed by them, what they want, what they need, how to handle situations, and how to tackle anti-trafficking.
That's why it blows my mind that it would go on their record, when they have survived something. And it's so important for them to get back on their feet. Why break them down harder? Make it more difficult.
Well, we've wanted to separate trafficking and prostitution. And I always say to people, like, no little girl dreams of growing up and being a prostitute. So there are some nations, and it's expanding in the world, that have made it illegal to buy sex. And basically the principle behind those laws is that it's never okay for one of our daughters to sell herself. Like, we've come to that place. We've basically devalued women, or devalued a person to that point. And so I love that. And they've seen, Sweden was the first one, but they've seen several other countries, Israel and several others, who have passed similar laws, who go after the demand as opposed to those being sold. So I think those kind of things are great. And like I said, Texas just passed a similar law in their state this year, which is really amazing. And I hope many other states will follow suit. So.
And there's different types of human trafficking, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to just read this. I know it will sound very like, but I think it's really important that we understand what trafficking is and isn't, because it will kind of help us talk about it a little bit. So, it says it's defined as severe forms of trafficking in persons, such as sex trafficking, in which a person in a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. So this is here in the U.S. Obviously, adulthood is 18. So it's automatically a situation of trafficking if they're less than 18 and there's any of that. But above that, it is force, fraud, or coercion. And the reason that's important, I'll finish this definition, but it's really important that you understand that. So the recruitment, the harboring, the transportation, the provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjugation to involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or slavery. And this person doesn't need to be physically transported from one location to another for the crime to fall into this definition. So Angela and I were talking before we started that, we have movies like Taken and a lot of these stories. And I won't say that it never, ever happens that way, but very often trafficking, and especially in the U.S., is almost always somebody that they know. Mm-hmm. I say this to people because I think it's really important. Trafficking is not a social issue. It's a business. Mm-hmm. And it's a selling of human beings. So for things like forced labor, domestic servitude, yes, which still very much happens around the world, child labor, sex, organ trafficking, so for the sale of organs, marriage trafficking, so trafficking of people to be married against their will, and child soldiers fall under human trafficking's definition. So we often think of things like Taken, where it's a force situation. Force can also look like forcing someone to take drugs so that they cooperate. Lots of different ways that can kind of manifest. Fraud happens often. I used to work in Moldova. It would look like a legitimate job placement company, and they would pay a service to get found a job in Europe, and then they would just disappear. So they would basically go with what looked like a legitimate job offer, show up at the airport, have their passport taken, and would not be seen again. But the person doesn't need to be moved. And if you think of it as a business, and I think this is why this is really important to understand, having somebody that is coerced and isn't going to fight you is the easiest way to sell a human being. Kidnapping a child off of the lawn of a family that's going to go looking for them is not the most effective method of making money. So it's not that it doesn't ever happen, but it's pretty rare, at least here in the United States, that that's what trafficking looks like. And because of that, we often aren't looking for what trafficking looks like most of the time, and especially here in the United States. So I say to people, there is no one face of human trafficking. And so it's really important that we get one very reliable sources for information. And so not just spreading things that are being shared online, but checking the source of information. We had a lot of issues last year with false information or half-truths being shared so much online that many anti-trafficking organizations were spending extra time and money trying to combat the lies about human trafficking and the fear it created, instead of actually being able to help those that were in need. And things like shares online were then getting called in over and over again, even though it wasn't first person So it was,
why?
Well, just, I mean, genuinely people who are concerned, but they see a report online, it gets shared, and nobody's looking at what the actual source was. And so then it just clogs up phone lines and, and reporting systems. So it's really important, absolutely report, but report because it's firsthand knowledge, or at the very least, like secondhand verified knowledge. And make sure, even as you look at statistics or information or stories, that it's from legitimate sources. It's really important. We have on the Freedom Society website, it's not like conclusive in terms of like all the reliable sources, but some really good sources. Our National Anti-Trafficking Hotline, the organization that runs that, has information and up-to-date data for every state. And so that's really helpful to know, not just, okay, yes, this blanket kind of, this is happening in the United States, but actually what it looks like in my local area. I've lived in places where actually it was mostly labor trafficking. So we often always think that it's sex trafficking, and it is not. We often always think that it's women, and it's actually, we estimate somewhere around 40% men and boys in the United States.
Are they usually younger boys? I mean,
can be, but not necessarily, because labor trafficking is also an issue here in the United States. There was a case once that I was aware of that was a man who immigrated to the U.S. He was actually a doctor where he came from, but he didn't speak the language, and didn't know our laws in terms of labor. Came to the U.S. and his licenses didn't transfer exactly, so he just got a job on a farm, on a local farm, and was being trafficked on the farm, was kept under lock and key, and this was a highly educated person. So if you've ever been to a foreign country where you don't know the culture and you don't know anybody and you don't speak the language, like, you're incredibly vulnerable. It's really, I've felt that way many times in India, and I love that place, but it's definitely, you're trusting your driver, you're trusting any number of things to, because you don't honestly know. So, so it can look lots of different ways. We also have about 40 to 45% of those trafficked are those of color in the United States. So, so it's also not, kind of wealthy white children, which is often what is portrayed as the face of kind of human trafficking in the United States. But it's not only immigrant either. So, so this is the whole point, is not to create fear, but to recognize it can be it is literally in rural neighborhoods, in the cities, in any, it can be in any place or location, because the bottom line is it's $150 billion a year industry to sell people. And so, so there's nowhere that it cannot hide. And so, so it is really important to get good sources and to be aware.
And the internet probably makes it easier too.
Yes, to sell people to, there's an incredible and growing, because of COVID, trafficking moved online a lot during COVID. So we saw an increase in calls about children and online activity, a pretty steep incline over COVID, which is still continuing. So because there wasn't in-person sex trafficking happening, a lot of that moved online. There's already been, an incredible issue with trafficking in children online for online sex. And so, so that is a real issue. When you think about that being able to be done in somebody's home, you wouldn't necessarily see it. And so, so that's why this definition is really important, because honestly, moving people across borders is not an easy thing to do. And so it's not that it doesn't happen, it definitely does, but it's not the only way that trafficking happens.
And then what about like if somebody's selling like explicit pictures, is that considered trafficking as well?
It can. Again, it's got to kind of fall under this. We saw some really big cases this last year where they went after Pornhub because there were proven cases of young women who were trafficked, who were having their pictures and videos sold online without their consent. And so, and again, pornography and prostitution, a lot of these activities are legal or overlooked in our country. And so, so a lot of things, even like the shooting that happened in the Asian salon, are things that are happening in our neighborhoods, but we just, are turning a blind eye in a lot of cases.
You just never know. You never know where it's going to happen or. Yeah, it's always to be aware. But are there traits that someone can look out for if they're noticing scenarios?
Yes, there are. Obviously, when it comes to kids, and when I say kids, I mean, obviously it can go all the way down to infants, but typically we look at like mid-teens as kind of the more typical age. So, I think we always say to people, and there's information on our website with some resources for parents in terms of being able to create some online safety and help your teach your children about online safety. That's really important. I think we're beyond the time where it's like I can just somehow keep my kid in a bubble and not, vulnerable online, but we can help our kids be equipped and know the places and the apps and the things that are more dangerous than others. I also say to parents too as well, privacy should not be a thing with children. I believe under 25. And I don't say that out of paranoia. It's just that because trafficking is typically done by those that have groomed ahead of time. So when I say somebody they know, it can be a family member. It can be, a teacher or somebody that they know in that kind of sense. But a lot of times it is, and when you think about a trafficker making thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands on this person, they will spend a year or two grooming someone so that they actually won't fight them when push comes to shove and it enters into technical trafficking. So being aware of who your kids are talking to, who they're meeting, those kinds of things are really important. So obviously sporadic behavior, anything that's just totally out of character for someone in your life. If you're speaking to someone, they don't have access to their own documentation, so they don't have access to their passport. There is no job where your passport should be confiscated or your documentation should be confiscated, where people don't know kind of where they work or where you hear a sign of something that's, and it may not be trafficking, but just exploitation, but, they're working crazy longer hours than they should be. They're getting paid illegal pay, like they should be getting paid minimum wage at least, and that's not happening. So definitely those things. And the difficulty is often, we can put up signs that say like, are you being trafficked? And I've spoken to many survivors who didn't know they were being trafficked because their perception of that is, again, I got moved across borders or so. So one of the things that's really important in your language is not just kind of that, but like, do you need help? I think people know like instinctively, like I'm in a situation I didn't intend to be in one way or the other, and this has gone way beyond okay. And so looking for that, obviously with children, any sort of physical, things that don't really make sense. With young teens, they have all of a sudden money or clothing or something that you didn't give them money to buy. any number of those things. But I often say to people too, and obviously those are more signs if you're noticing something. I think the best way forward is to actually have the conversations with your kids before it gets to a place where you're noticing those things. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll entirely prevent it, but equipping them to know what's okay and what isn't okay, to know how to safely use their devices, and letting them know that there are people who, who are looking to gain access to them. And so all of those things are really important.
That's a huge topic with my kids these days. They want their own YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And they don't understand why I won't let them have one.
Yeah.
But you do hear stories of, kids, and I just don't want them to have it, and that's just me.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. They're like, but my friend has it. It's like, okay, well, if they jumped off a bridge, would you? I'm like, no, that's not acceptable in our house. I got to protect them.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think they don't truly understand, even with explanation, what they can get into online. And, the more access you give them online, the more it's difficult for you to track that access as well, to keep them safe. So, total access at a young age is not a good idea. It's a battle worth fighting as parents. But I would also say, don't go so restrictive that you've completely unprepared your child for growing into adulthood. And when they have access to that you've all of a sudden the world is opened up to them. You're not there, and you've not prepared them for how to handle those things responsibly as an adult. Yeah. So that's why I say don't go into entire protection bubble mode, because you can't do it. No. And they are, tell me a job you can do without technology anymore. Right. Right? That is part of all of our lives. And there's wonderful things about it. So it's not also to be only afraid of technology, because technology also helps us combat human trafficking. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, if we don't equip our kids, and we don't have those conversations, those difficult conversations. And I get it. I didn't grow up with the technology. I sent my first email in college. I'm way behind my kids. I'm way behind my kids in technology. Gavin will attest. They tease me about it all the time. But so I get it. But I think it is that dynamic of like, it's okay to get your kid a flip phone until they're older. Yeah. And like, it's okay to.
Or even one of those that you can't take any pictures.
Exactly.
You can still take them with the flip phone.
It's okay. It's okay to do some of those things. But just make sure you're not just laying down the rule without having the conversation. Like, help them understand that you're not trying to punish them compared to their friends, but that you are trying to teach them how to handle it responsibly and at the age that's responsible, where they're able to understand. And then just do everything you can in those preteen, teen years to stay present and active. And the other thing that I tell people that I think is really important, because part of what happened last year with all of kind of the mixed information was that I was having people come in all the time and who were afraid that their kids were going to get kidnapped. And I would say to them, look, I think it's great that you watch out for and care for your kids. Mm-hmm. That's not typically how trafficking happens. But this is what I would say. Since you are a concerned parent, look for the kids in your community, your immediate community, that are more vulnerable, and bring them into that circle of concern.
Yeah. So people would come up to you at the tea room?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Concerned, because there was so much being shared last year. Conspiracy theories mixed in with, just enough truth that, it made it compelling. And again, it's not to say that it never, ever happens this way, but it's just very, very rare. So what ends up then happening is people aren't equipped to actually spot what trafficking typically looks like. And it was happening in the midst of COVID. So everybody was online more, right? But that's also the very thing, right? Like, if you have kids that are doing online schooling and they're in a single parent home, and even if it's an amazing single parent home, and they're on their own for hours at home online. Like, that's what I mean with bringing into your circle of care, like talking to that single parent and saying, like, I get that you have to work. Like, how can I help? Creating a community that's looking out for one another.
Do you think that was all because of COVID, that people were going a little haywire with statistics, or?
Maybe. I mean, I think those things were kind of all getting passed in the context of the elections and lots of stuff and QAnon and lots of stuff that was happening. And again, it wasn't all bad, but it was just enough misinformation to, one, scare people, and two, not give good quality information to actually equip people to combat and to spot it, to prevent it. And so that's what I say to people, like, don't be a person that has just enough information to basically not do anything. But get the national hotline in your phone, be ready to do something, and looking out, put aside human trafficking and, looking out for those in your community that need help. COVID has hit our communities hard, and it doesn't matter what community you're in. People have lost jobs. People have, had to try to work and have kids at home, and who knows what this fall will look like long term. So, but just being that person that lets your neighbors know, or your immediate community, like, hey, if you ever need help, I'm happy for your kids to come over after school and do homework with my kids, or whatever that looks like. One of the things I loved during COVID, I heard several people like kind of create, I remember what they called it. It was like a little bubble of people that they were, that they kind of shared responsibilities with schooling. And so they worked a couple of days and then had all the kids a couple of days. And with quarantines and that kind of stuff, they were able to just kind of keep that little bubble of people, but they did it between multiple families. And I think that's amazing. So, just looking for ways to do that. Those who either by something that's happened, or just the dynamic in their life, who are either in situations of financial difficulty, that's can be a serious doorway to trafficking. We've even seen in the U.S. as a result of COVID, where landlords have trafficked their renters in lieu of rent. And that's kind of formed this new kind of trafficking, whether forcing them to have sex with them themselves or trafficking them out because they couldn't pay rent. And like I said, we've seen trafficking cases in mansions and in, our inner cities and farms. And so there's, and I don't say that to make you fearful. I just say that to make you aware.
Yeah,
like,
it's true.
Don't close off your, that kind of sense that you have when something's not quite right. It's worth an investigation into things.
And how does the U.S. rate? You said India is the highest, but how does the U.S. rate in comparison to other countries?
So we estimate about 350,000 trafficked a year in the U.S. Again, this is an illegal trade, you guys, so it's not like we have exact numbers and anything. And again, this is just situations where, these numbers are just situations where people are trafficked by that definition. That doesn't include those that are exploited, those that are abused.
Or the ones that aren't even reported.
Right. So we have, and these aren't necessarily reported. It's kind of taking that data and kind of, multiplying it across, like, okay, what percentage do we, does it look like? So again, it's not exact numbers by any means. But it's definitely happening in the U.S. We have a pretty severe crisis on our southern border going on right now in regard to trafficking. But we have it in our neighborhoods. And again, the move to online last year in particular with school definitely, and having lots more people working online increased online trafficking a lot.
And we learned, with what I do at UMFS, we learned that even during school, some of the kids would keep their cameras off.
Yeah.
So then they couldn't see the abuse or whatever was happening inside the home.
Yeah. And of course, it was the most detrimental in communities, low-income communities. And so, in places where there weren't parents at home, there wasn't internet at home, where there was already, violence going on. So these kind of things are always the hardest and the most felt by those communities. So, yeah, I think getting much more involved in your kids' tech and responding to those kind of things, like, okay, that didn't strike me as right. If it's a severe kind of red flag, or you're like, I'm pretty sure this is, call the national hotline first rather than a local, rather than a local resource. Because it will immediately connect to federal government in terms of the best resources, and then they'll bring in local resources as necessary. Your local organizations are not necessarily trained well in handling trafficking situations, and it's usually not safest for a trafficking survivor to be cared for in the local community where they were trafficked. So most of the resources for anti-trafficking and expertise for anti-trafficking sit at the federal level. So that is the first call to make, and they'll walk you through everything to do, and take down the information and take it from there. But also, if you're kind of suspicious, but maybe like not at a point where you feel like, oh yeah, I've seen evidence of this, or ask the questions. Like, you don't want to look back and regret that you didn't follow up on something, or something struck you as off, and then you read about it in the newspaper. So like, it's okay, and you don't need to be the one to like go in there and bust it or anything like that. That's not the point either. But just looking for the signs. Like I said, there's way more detailed information with links on our website. But also Polaris.org, which is, and their link is on our website, but they run the national headline, the national hotline. They have tons of information per state in terms of what trafficking looks like in your state. In some states that are more rural, it might look like more labor trafficking. Just depends on the place and kind of what it looks like. And they give up-to-date information. So they're a really great resource, as are several government agencies, in terms of what trafficking is looking like right now, and how to best combat it. So, and they've also got free resources. I brought stuff for Angela, but we've got free resources from the Blue campaign that you can get. You can pick them up in our shop, but this has got information for everything from labor service indicators, control indicators, living condition indicators, travel indicators, medical indicators. So there's training for health professionals and hospitality, like for hotels and police and teachers. And so there's more specific kind of identification training out there that the government provides, as well as several organizations. So you're welcome to start on our website, which is freedomsocietycollective.com. And that's got on our Learn page a lot of links to information.
So if you didn't meet that woman way back when, do you think you'd still be doing this today?
I don't think so. I mean, I think what I've learned along the way is that we each have a role to play. And obviously for some that's larger than others. I don't expect that everybody's going to go into full-time anti-trafficking work any more than you expect everybody to do full-time foster care. But I think it is such a huge issue. And I say to people, we study our history in terms of slavery, but there's that question of like, okay, if I lived then, what would I have done? And the reality is we have more enslaved today than we ever have.
That's terrible.
And so how, what is our little part, and what does that look like? What role do we have to play? So we've been doing this little program for kids at the shop. We talked to them about the history of tea and all of that. But there was a man in England who created Wedgwood China. And so he owned a business, selling china. But he was the major funder of the abolition movement that ended slavery in England. And so, and there were, many of those that when they found out, for example, their sugar was being produced by slaves on plantations, boycotted sugar and got that shut down. So we often use kind of that tea experience to just say, like, all of us can do something, whether that's a business, whether that's a skill set, whether it's volunteering with an organization, whether it's purchasing Freedom product, whether it's just attending a training, talking to our own children, and passing on the information to others. We all can play a part. And I think we want to be able to say, hey, in my generation, I didn't just turn a blind eye to this, and so that's kind of where I'm at. I can't unsee what I've seen.
Yeah. It's your passion.
And so I have to do what I can do.
Yeah. We're all put on here for some type of purpose.
Yes, exactly.
And this is yours.
Exactly.
And so before we close, I always ask this question to all of our guests at UMFS. We pride our families, our staff, our children as being unwavering champions. How are you an unwavering champion in the community?
I don't know if I am an unwavering champion. That's quite a statement. But I would say...
I'd say you certainly are.
I think that's the thing. I think it's whatever that passion is, whatever that dynamic is that you've been kind of, like you said, put on the earth to do for the benefit of others. Yeah. Continuing to walk that path, and looking for opportunities to make a difference. So yeah, it's not about how big or how small that contribution is. I think it's just about the consistency of continuing to say, as long as this is going on, I'm going to stand and make an impact and try to be one who is a light bringer in our community. And, part of what I love about what I do is obviously there's the heaviness and the weight of kind of the enormity of human trafficking. But I have names and faces and just amazing people in my life because of this journey. And so I really see it as for me that I've had the incredible blessing of working with and standing with amazing survivors who have overcome things I can't imagine, and who have impacted my life in just incredible ways. So I'm super grateful. I didn't set out to go to India or any of these other places, but I'm so, so grateful to God that I've gotten those experiences and gotten to know the people that I have. And so yeah, I feel like they're the champion, and I have gotten to, just the privilege of walking with them in their journey for freedom.
Yeah.
So
that's how I feel about, doing what I do in the foster care system. It's always so much trauma and so much heaviness, but, there are good times and there are great, stories and moments. Yeah. And that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we didn't actually get to that, but we probably should before we finish. So if you are a foster parent, two things. One, absolutely please make sure, even if you only have a child for a short period of time, to get yourself educated on the signs and online safety, and equip that child as much as you can. We do see, especially in the U.S., the foster children are more vulnerable to human trafficking. And Angela was sharing that a lot of kids have been trafficked. So if you find that information out and that isn't yet known, or if that is known, I want to encourage you to, again, if it's new information, reach out to the national hotline. Again, keeping in mind, I recognize that child is out of that situation, but if we don't report those situations, it can make another child vulnerable. But also really important that we are able to keep up-to-date information, and it will also open the door to resources for your foster child, for resources to help them, bring them into community, counseling, and aftercare. So if they haven't received that, the hotline is a great place for that. You can call the hotline too, even if you're not reporting, and but you want to be aware of what resources are available in your local area. Absolutely, that's a great way to go, because they're going to be able to point you to kind of the best sources of help and community and support. We do have some wonderful organizations here locally, but I would still probably recommend making that your first step, and then looking at those resources. I think it is absolutely important that they have healing and community. And so one of the hopes, and I'm going to talk to Angela about it today, is also there are some training resources for foster families in regards to working with survivors and how to do that. I can imagine, especially if that's information that comes out after you fostered and you weren't aware of it, that can feel overwhelming. Yeah. So there are some really great resources out there. And one of the things we launched this last year at Freedom Society was a membership. We do give monthly into different anti-trafficking organizations working with children, but the goal was, obviously we're just starting to come together because of COVID, but the goal was to come together monthly and begin to look at ways that we can engage in anti-trafficking work in our local community. So if that's some way that you want to get engaged, feel free to. There's information on the website as well as stop in the shop, because there's things like getting our local teachers trained and health professionals and things that we want to do here locally to help bridge those gaps. And so that, at least in our local Fredericksburg area, we're equipped as best we can to spot it, to prevent it, and to make a difference. So,
well, thank you, Nicole.
Absolutely, thank you so much.
You. I know it's a heavy topic, but it's so important.
Absolutely,
it's such a global situation, and that's about the nicest way I can say it. But I appreciate all that you do, especially for our community. And so just one more time, if listeners are wanting to know your website.
So freedomsocietycollective.com. And like I said, the Learn page is on there. Information about the tea room is on there. We've got an online shop. And but come and see us. Yes. And I'd love to have you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was so nice to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And again, this is Angela Rivers with Fredericksburg Mission. Of course, if you'd like to learn more about becoming a foster parent, please visit www.umfs.org. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. I'm Angela Rivers with Fredericksburg Mission. Tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to your podcast. Join us again next week for our next episode.
How do you shorten the time it takes to buy a car? Car buying just got easier. Pohanka365.com lets you complete as much or as little of the car buying process online. Pohanka365.com. Car buying simplified. Anytime, anywhere.